Drake is among a list of rappers potentially appearing as witnesses in the trial of South Florida rapper XXXTentacion.
Me at Rolling Loud, bro. When I go to Rolling Loud, I'm getting off the stage. I'm not performing on stage. I'm jumping off stage, and
The courtroom was electric with tension. A surreal mix of disbelief and curiosity hung in the air as Dedrick Williams, one of the convicted individuals in the shocking case of XXXTentacion's untimely end, made his move. This time, it wasn't just about proving his innocence or questioning the evidence against him. No, this was something far bigger. Dedrick's appeal carried a bombshell revelation that no one saw coming, not even in this tangled web of celebrity feuds, accusations, and courtroom theatrics. He pointed a finger at one of the biggest names in the music industry, Drake.
Sentence on the grounds that he did not receive a fair trial. And this is in part due to what his attorneys say is the exclusion of evidence that pointed the finger or maybe pointed the finger at other people. And one of those people whose name has come up is rapper Drake.
Yes, that Drake, the global rap icon, the artist who moves millions with every release, the man whose face seems to be etched into the fabric of pop culture itself. Suddenly, Drake wasn't just a headline for his chart-topping hits or his extravagant lifestyle. Now, his name was being dragged into a case that had already captivated and horrified fans around the world. Dedrick Williams' attorney, Mauricio Padilla, wasn't mincing words either. His argument was as bold as it was unnerving. The feud between XXXTentacion and Drake wasn't just some petty online spat. It might hold the key to unraveling the truth behind the events of that fateful day.
You are as guilty as they are because you were an essential part of that crime. When you went to spend that blood money on sneakers and jerseys, you revealed to the court the value you place on the human life.
But let's rewind for a moment. To understand just how explosive this claim is, you have to grasp the weight of what's being suggested here. This wasn't just about a tweet or a casual mention in an interview. This was about a deeply rooted animosity that had simmered for years, spilling over into public forums, lyrics, and cryptic messages that fans and critics alike had dissected endlessly. It all started back in 2017 when XXXTentacion, an enigmatic and controversial figure in his own right, rose to prominence with his raw, unfiltered style that seemed to cut straight to the bone of his generation's frustrations and pain. His breakout track, with its distorted beats and aggressive energy, didn't just catch ears, it grabbed throats.
Yeah, I have a lot of compassion for the things that I do in my life, but as far as just like everything that goes on around me, I feel like I've become very pessimistic.
But with fame came friction, and one of the earliest and most public clashes he had was with none other than Drake. It wasn't just about music, it was personal, or at least that's how XXXTentacion made it seem. He accused Drake of copying his flow, his style, and essentially lifting the essence of his breakout track for Drake's own song, featured on the massively successful More Life project. The accusation wasn't subtle either. XXXTentacion called Drake out publicly, labeling him as inauthentic and dismissing him as someone who wasn't truly about the culture. For a young artist clawing his way to the top, the idea of being overshadowed or imitated by someone as colossal as Drake was fuel for his fire. And he didn't let it go. The public feud spiraled, with XXXTentacion doubling down in interviews and on social media, calling Drake all kinds of names and accusing him of everything from biting his style to being disconnected from the struggles of younger artists. The tension was palpable, and fans from both camps jumped into the fray, turning what might have been a fleeting moment into a full-blown war of words. Then came the infamous post, the now deleted message that XXXTentacion shared on Instagram, claiming that if anything ever happened to him, the one to blame would be none other than Champagne Papi, Drake's well-known social media handle.
Drake hit up a DJ that I with. He was like, yo, Drake, watch your interview. He said he with you. He's saying he go call your manager within the next few days.
It was a post that sent shockwaves through the hip-hop community. Even after XXXTentacion deleted it and claimed his account had been hacked, the damage was done. The insinuation lingered like smoke after a fire, impossible to ignore. Fans speculated endlessly, conspiracy theories bloomed, and the feud became something much darker than a simple clash of egos. What made it even more chilling was the timing. Months later, XXXTentacion's life was cut short under circumstances that left more questions than answers. And now, years down the line, Dedrick Williams' appeal had ripped open the old wound, pointing directly at the feud as evidence that the real story behind the tragedy might still be untold. But here's the kicker. It wasn't just about the tweet or the beef. Padilla's argument hinged on something far more insidious. something that called into question the very integrity of the investigation itself. Why, he asked, had no one pursued this lead? Why had Drake, with all his influence and reach, managed to avoid even the faintest hint of scrutiny in a case that had scrutinized everyone else connected to XXXTentacion? Padilla wasn't accusing Drake outright, he was too calculated for that. Instead, he painted a picture of missed opportunities, of leads left cold, of questions that were never asked. And in doing so, he introduced just enough doubt to make the courtroom and the public stop and consider the unthinkable.
Bro, I'm amped up. Nigga, I fuck with Drake.
Yeah.
You feel me? Drake a genius. He was supposed to contact one of my managers, so he doesn't do it. That same
The defense wasn't just relying on speculation either. They brought up Drake's own lyrics, dissecting them with the kind of fervor usually reserved for academic debates. Take his track, I'm Upset, for instance. The line about 50,000 on his head? Fans had long speculated that it was a direct reference to the events surrounding XXXTentacion's final moments. And what about the more recent lines from his collaboration with 21 Savage, lyrics that seemed to hint at revisiting old conflicts and silencing those who spoke out of turn? To some, it was all just clever wordplay, the kind of braggadocio that's as much a part of rap as beats and rhymes. But to others, it was something much more sinister, a breadcrumb trail leading straight to a truth that no one wanted to admit.
Me and XXX was really close, right? XXX is walking around with $50,000 in a duffel bag.
No security.
And then there was 600 Breezy, the Chicago rapper with ties to Drake, who had publicly claimed that Drake had given him the green light to handle XXXTentacion during their feud. It was a claim that Breezy later walked back, but the damage was already done. It added another layer to the narrative, another piece to the puzzle that Padilla was so carefully constructing. If nothing else, it raised the question of just how far loyalty to Drake extended and what lengths some might go to in order to protect or avenge him. For Drake, the implications were enormous. Here was an artist who had built a career on being untouchable, on transcending the petty dramas and beefs that often dragged others down. And yet, his name was now being uttered in the same breath as one of the most shocking cases in recent memory. It wasn't just a legal issue, it was a PR nightmare, a stain on his otherwise carefully curated image. And the fact that he had chosen not to comment publicly only fueled the speculation. Was he staying silent because there was nothing to say, or because there was too much?
life. I'm not living that life. I mean, I'm gonna fight it. I'm gonna fight it. If I gotta poke you, I'm gonna poke you. I was never one to shoot at people.
As the courtroom drama unfolded, the lines between fact and fiction blurred even further. Padilla's strategy wasn't just to defend Dedrick Williams, it was to make everyone question everything they thought they knew about the case. And in doing so, he turned the spotlight onto one of the biggest names in the world, dragging him into a narrative that was as messy as it was compelling. But if you think this is where the story ends, think again. Because for all the questions Padilla raised, there were still plenty more waiting to be asked, and the answers, if they ever came, promised to shake the industry to its core. But just as the courtroom's atmosphere couldn't seem more charged, Dedrick Williams' attorney lobbed another bombshell into the mix, one that took the already volatile situation and set it ablaze. Mauricio Padilla wasn't content with just questioning the investigation's integrity, he went after the very foundation of it. Why, he demanded, had the authorities so conveniently disregarded the connections between XXXTentacion's volatile past and the powerful figures who might have had reasons to see him silenced? Because make no mistake, the late rapper wasn't just a rising star, he was a lightning rod for conflict, a provocateur who seemed to have a knack for turning every industry heavyweight into an adversary. And at the top of that list, Padilla argued, was Drake.
In fact, surveillance footage from the scene actually captures this shocking moment as two masked gunmen, later identified as Boatwright and Newsom, emerged from the vehicle, confronted the rapper at his driver's side window. There is a brief but very violent exchange with one of the men shooting.
Padilla wasn't merely rehashing old social media posts or the infamous deleted message. He was digging deeper, pulling at the threads of a narrative that had been there all along but deliberately ignored. He pointed to the mounting tensions between XXXTentacion and the OVO camp, the whispers of behind-the-scenes intimidation, and the eerie timing of cryptic statements made by those both close to the case and far removed from it. It wasn't just about the feud anymore. It was about the culture of silence and complicity that allowed an investigation to focus solely on a few men caught on camera, while ignoring the larger, more shadowy figures lurking in the background. And the lyrics. Oh, the lyrics. Padilla's team had scoured every bar, every metaphor, every coy line that could be interpreted as a veiled reference to the events in question. Take Drake's recent collaborations, for example. His wordplay had always been a blend of vague threats and clever bravado, but when examined under the microscope of this case, some of those lines took on an entirely different meaning. If he held his tongue on that live, he'd be alive again. It was a line that had sparked countless Reddit threads and YouTube breakdowns, and now it was being dissected in a courtroom, its implications hanging in the air like a storm cloud.
In the brief and in what I was arguing in court is the latter. We are, a defendant has every right to defend himself and to show reasonable doubt wherever it may be, and to fully investigate and articulate to a jury an alternate shooter defense or an alternate, a defense where someone else, committed this crime.
But it wasn't just Drake's words that were coming under scrutiny. It was his actions, or rather, his lack of them. Why, Padilla pressed, had Drake refused to cooperate with earlier subpoenas? Why had his legal team fought tooth and nail to keep him off the stand, going so far as to label the very idea of his involvement oppressive? And why, after all this time, had no one in law enforcement thought to question the people in his orbit, the ones who might have had something to gain or lose from XXXTentacion's demise? Padilla's insinuation was clear. The original investigation had been tailored to produce an open and shut case, one that tied up loose ends without ever pulling on the threads that might lead to more uncomfortable truths. As Padilla continued to build his case, he turned his attention to another figure whose name had been whispered in connection to XXXTentacion's story, but had never taken center stage: 600 Breezy. The Chicago rapper had been vocal in his support of Drake during the feud, even going so far as to suggest that he'd been given a green light to confront XXXTentacion. While Breezy had later downplayed those comments, the damage was done. It painted a picture of an ecosystem where loyalty to powerful figures like Drake could translate into real-world consequences for their detractors. And while Breezy wasn't directly implicated in the events that unfolded, his involvement added another layer of intrigue to an already convoluted story.
Real quick about why you think the judge did this, because in the appellate brief, and correct me if I'm wrong, there is an accusation that the court might have been biased because of Drake's celebrity status. Correct me if that allegation is wrong, and in your opinion, why do you believe the court ultimately wouldn't allow the deposition of Drake?
And then there was the matter of the industry itself. Padilla wasn't just questioning individuals, he was questioning the very system that allowed these feuds to escalate unchecked. He brought up the culture of hip-hop as a backdrop, where rivalries weren't just lyrical battles, but real-world power struggles, with stakes that went far beyond album sales and chart positions. He pointed to other high-profile clashes that had turned violent in the past, suggesting that XXXTentacion's untimely end was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern, one that the music industry was all too willing to overlook in favor of profit and spectacle. But Padilla wasn't done painting this picture of a toxic, high-stakes industry fueled by ego and unchecked ambition. He dropped a particularly chilling detail, whispers of a meeting involving several key players in the rap game allegedly organized to address XXXTentacion's rising influence. While these claims were impossible to verify, Padilla brought forward witnesses willing to testify about the whispers they had heard floating around studios and industry events. According to these accounts, there was a growing unease about how fast XXXTentacion was climbing the ranks, and some in the industry saw him not as a rising star, but as a threat to their dominance. Whether it was his raw authenticity or his fearless approach to confrontation, he was the kind of artist who disrupted the status quo, and not everyone was ready to embrace that.
Questions. And I really wasn't able to properly defend my client. Mr. Williams did not get a fair trial. When I read this, I think there's like some kind of a defense mechanism when you try a case for 11 weeks that you start forgetting things. When I read this, it brought it all back, and it reminded me of really how unfair the judge was with Mr. Williams and the detrimental effects that it had for me.
Padilla also pointed to the peculiar dynamics of XXXTentacion's streaming success. Despite being frequently embroiled in controversy, his music continued to rack up billions of plays, often outpacing some of the more established names in the industry. This, Padilla argued, might have rubbed certain people the wrong way. He suggested that powerful figures in the music world might have viewed XXXTentacion's unfiltered style as not only a challenge to their artistry, but a destabilizing force in an industry carefully built on curated personas and controlled narratives. Could his refusal to play by the unspoken rules of the game have put a target on his back? Padilla didn't answer that question directly, but he didn't have to. The implication hung heavy in the air. And then there was the money trail. Padilla's team hinted that they were digging into financial records that might reveal unusual transactions linked to individuals who had reason to keep XXXTentacion out of the picture. While no concrete evidence had been presented yet, the mere mention of a financial motive was enough to send shockwaves through the courtroom. After all, in an industry where fortunes are built on streaming numbers and brand deals, the sudden removal of an artist as influential as XXXTentacion could have far-reaching consequences, not just for his competitors, but for the labels and executives who stood to gain or lose depending on who controlled the charts.
So many errors that it takes a while to even break it down. One of the main errors in my opinion in the case, which I had to sit through, argue, and live it, was the fact that in December of 2020, I filed a witness list. The state's reaction to that was to file a motion saying, we want the court to strike all of his witnesses.
And this is where things took an even darker turn. Padilla's team began to introduce evidence that suggested the possibility of a wider conspiracy, one that involved not just Drake, but other figures in the industry who had clashed with XXXTentacion over the years. There were the public confrontations, of course, but also the quieter, more insidious moves, the alleged blackballing of his music, the refusal to acknowledge his contributions to the culture, and the persistent efforts to paint him as a villain rather than a victim. While some might argue that XXXTentacion's own actions had contributed to his contentious reputation, Padilla's argument was clear. This wasn't just about one man's mistakes. It was about the people who stood to benefit from his absence.
He writes me June 16th saying, be safe, okay? Question mark. Don't let your guard down. Next day he right?
Even as Padilla pushed this narrative, the defense's strategy wasn't without its critics. Prosecutors dismissed the allegations as baseless, pointing to the overwhelming evidence that had already led to the convictions of Dedrick Williams and his co-defendants. But the seeds of doubt had been planted, and in the court of public opinion, they were growing fast. Social media was ablaze with speculation, fans and critics alike digging through old interviews, tweets, and lyrics for clues that might validate or debunk Padilla's claims. The case, which had once seemed so straightforward, was now anything but.
Made various reversible errors, and I think from the beginning he made a lot of calls that were unconstitutional, not legal, this being one of them. I don't want to speculate as to why, but when you're dealing with someone like Drake, which he's not a celebrity, he's a super celebrity. He's like in the stratosphere of fame. So when a judge does a 180 like that, I'll let the viewers or.
And yet, for all the questions Padilla raised, the answers remained elusive. Drake's silence only added to the mystery, fueling rumors that ranged from the plausible to the absurd. Was he staying quiet to protect himself? Or was he simply refusing to dignify the allegations with a response? And what about the other figures Padilla had hinted at? The ones whose names hadn't yet been revealed, but whose influence could be felt in the shadows of this case. The more Padilla pushed, the more it seemed like the real story was still waiting to be uncovered. But here's the thing about stories like this. The deeper you dig, the messier they get. And in a world where power and influence can buy silence, the truth isn't always easy to find. So what do you think? Is Padilla onto something, or is this just another conspiracy theory blown out of proportion? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, stay tuned, because this story is far from over.